Etsy. It's a similar idea in terms of, there are these areas and work groups that actually do the work and work on the standards and stuff like that. So when we took it, there was an obvious area that this belonged in, but there wasn't an obvious work group for us to take this to and say, can we do this work here in the IETF? So we had to justify creating a new work group because nobody wanted to add that onto their charter. So we basically had to justify this. And the way you do this is you create a BOF, a birds of a feather. It's kind of a discussion of of does this work belong in the IETF or does it belong someplace else? And if it does belong in the IETF, what's the charter? What's the scope of work that work group's allowed to work on, right? So we had to go through this kind of justification process. That took us like two or three
took a year.
iteration, IETF meetings to get that to happen. And so we got a charter, with the scope of work for vCon, and then we had a forum, we had to find the chairs and all that kind of stuff.
Build it, yeah.
Work group chairs, and then we had a forum by which to start doing this work, right? So we brought these, the initial draft to the work group. The work group adopted that. Probably took
another year or so.
Another, a few iterations of the draft and IETF meetings to get it to actually be an adopted official work group item. And then we went through some other iterations, and we divided things up into pieces. And the reason we did that was to accelerate the definition of the JSON definition or the schema of vCon. And so what we've been trying to do is accelerate that one piece because we don't have a huge number of people who are actually working on this work group. It's a small work group, not a lot of eyeballs, and so rather than spreading it out, eyeballs across a bunch of different documents, we're trying to get the work group to focus on this one draft, this one internet draft, which is a proposal that we hope to make an RFC. And that's been another couple of years, right? Which brings us kind of up to date. And where we are that is we have a few more issues that we have to address. There's a few issues related to conferencing, and there's a few other things that need clarification that are just fairly mechanical. But one or two kind of specification holes that need to be addressed, and that's what we're kind of working on, mostly in the work group right now. We didn't have a work group meeting at this the Shenzhen IETF meeting last week because there wasn't enough of a quorum of the active members in the work group that were going to actually be in attendance. So what we did is we had a interim meeting in January. We're going to have another interim meeting in April here coming up. And we're trying to do some work on the IETF email list to get this closed out. So what we need to do is we need to close up those issues, get agreement from the work group that this is ready for work group last call, meaning that at that stage in the phase, the work group people have reviewed it, the kind of agreement that it's stable and then there aren't any issues. Then it goes to the IAB, the architecture board at the IETF, right? And these are
basically the Supreme Court for the internet.
Right. So it's I don't know, about a dozen different experts in each of the areas, the area directors for each of these areas that I was talking about in the beginning. And each of them, or at least one member from each of the area groups, has to review that and make sure that we aren't violating anything in their area of expertise.
That's offline process, the review?
Yes, this happens behind the scenes, but the work group has to agree it's ready for work group last call, then it goes to them, and then they have a certain period of time, I think like 2 months, in which they're supposed to review that in. We get feedback from there, which may result in some things we have to address, or may be clear, we don't know, right? And so if they identify issues, it goes back to the work group, and we kind of repeat that process until we can get through, right? And that generally isn't too bad. I don't expect a lot of issues there. I've been trying to get some of the area directors or experts in these other areas to review certain aspects that I think might cause alarm or red flags and things like that. So I've been kind of preempting that. I'm hoping that that the IAB review will be fairly smooth, but we don't know, right? So that's why at this point it's kind of hard to predict. All right, when is it going to be an RFC? I know it's a question I get
lot.
all the time. It's like, when is it going to be an RFC? But I just want, people are concerned about that. I really want to reassure them that if you look at the draft we had 4 years, or not quite 4 years.
We were pretty good. Hasn't changed much.
We got most of it. Things have changed, and every single one of those changes, I've been able to write an adapter in our vCon stack that can convert it, right? So you run it through and it converts it to the latest version. There's been name changes, slight structural changes. There hasn't been any we got rid of stuff completely or
and there's not a lot of danger in also saying, okay, we're not going to do this now.
Right.
Right. It's going to be published.
Yeah.
It's
whether it takes us 2 months or it takes us another year, it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now you are in version 2.
Yeah.
That's another thing. The versioning is going to go away. Once it's solid, it becomes an RFC. The version concept is going away. It's a vCon, right? And then from then on, any changes that happen to that are handled as an extension. We've defined this extension mechanism, and through that extension mechanism, you label that as this vCon. It uses these extensions. This vCon will and there's a labeling mechanism. It's called critical. Sorry, I was stumbling on the name of it. So extensions that it's critical that the application support that are labeled, right? So this is a critical extension, and if you don't understand this extension, you shouldn't do anything with this vCon, right? There's a labeling on that. Whereas there are some extensions are kind of benign. They add stuff, and you can ignore it and safely process those things. So there's this extension mechanism. The versioning number is going to go away, and that we have this extension mechanism for and we've got some extensions already in the pipeline.
Yep.
We've got one for contact centers, and we've got one for Mimi. Anybody familiar with Mimi? Should I explain that? So Mimi is an attempt to enable federations of messaging systems. So everybody heard of Matrix? I'm familiar what it does. So the IETF is defining a standard that would basically enable what Matrix does in a standard way. There's a protocol. It's layered on top of MLS, which is message layer security. This is the end-to-end security. But it also layers on concepts of groups and chats and policies and things like that. So to enable this kind of federated exchange of text messages between different messaging realms and things like that. So there's because of all this rich data related to groups and things like that, it's not just simple SMS messages in terms of what you would put into a vCon. It's more elaborate, right? So we have a proposed extension for Mini for the IETF or for the vCon. Thomas has got is that work group? The consent stuff is not work group. That's
It has not been adopted yet.
Okay.
Right.
But there was the
So here, we want to switch places so I don't get you sick for a second?
Okay.
Hold on. So really quickly, so the extensions that I've been working on have been really looking down the consent lawful basis path. So the first one that we put in was called lawful basis, and we called it lawful basis because it's more than just consent. You give your consent today to be communicated with. I give my consent for you to call me or text me. We're all familiar with that. Next generation of consent is actually a different idea entirely, where we're giving consent and consent for purpose and not just for communications. So we're giving consent for training. We're giving consent to use my data to be searched. I'm giving my consent to be text and data mined. And all of those combinations of consent are described inside the lawful basis extension, so that if you're going to interchange your vCon, you can attach the consent or lawful basis with it. And just to tell you, because we've lived this whole world in this consent, lawful basis means consent, but there's actually, you could have done this by being under contract. So for instance, when you are, if you're data deepgram and you're transcribing on behalf of your customers, the lawful basis that deepgram has to hold the data I've given to it is contract. They're under contract to me, and that's why they're holding it. I'm the data controller, they're the data subject. And so in that case, the lawful basis isn't consent. It's that I have hired a company to do this on my behalf under contract. Now this is a big point for us phone guys for a second, because we've had a long history of Title I and Title II laws in the United States around can you record this or not, and whose right it is to do this. This hits right to that matter, because I think I've heard a lot of times, wait a second, how can I make a vCon if I don't have permissions to record? And the answer is there are 6 permissions to record, only one of them is consent. It could also be a central purpose. It could also be contract. It could also be lawful purpose, where I'm a government agency and I'm surveilling you because the judge said I should, right? All those things, and that's one of the extensions. Another extension that we put in, which is kind of snarky, but you know me. So one of the things I also found out about vCons is there are 6 to 10 different transcribers of speech between deepgram and Speechmatics and Whisper and all the like. So we've suggested another extension called a transcription extension that allows you to have a common format for transcriptions, so you as providers can choose which provider you want. We call it the World Transcription Format. As you might know, yeah, I know. And that seemed like a really good idea until we get on our first customer call, and Rick's like, should we put that box there that says WTF on it?
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. And so those are some of the extensions that we've been working with. And then, although I'm not sure if they fit into the extension model, there's one other that I just want to mention. So you also know that I've been really interested in SCIT. I'm interested in that distributed ledger, because I think one of the most important pieces of vCons is to enable auditing, to enable governance of the conversation. And the SCIT in the IETF world represents that indelible ledger. Once it gets written onto SCIT, it doesn't go away. So that if you wanted to do auditing of a process, you would write the events to your SCIT log, and then you would go back later on and then do the auditing there. So one of the other ones that we put in is called the life cycle draft. And so what happens in the life cycle draft is it explains what things you would write to a SCIT registry when things happen to a vCon. So vCon is created, you put vCon created on the SCIT. Can be withdrawn at any moment. Okay, so if you as a data subject have the right to ask for your data to be corrected, deleted, that's not new. That's your data subject rights. You have them today. In Europe, it's completely covered, and a lot of states in America and most countries. So it is definitely the sweep of the world. So, but how does that work when I gave a loan to vCon, and I have the original, and I've recorded Dan, and Dan goes, I don't want to be recorded. I'm withdrawing my rights. I'm withdrawing my consent. So here's how that works. Dan withdraws the consent, and something on the network goes, hey, Dan withdrew his consent, and that goes in the SCIT log. So you know exactly when Dan withdrew his consent. We can look at SCIT, and so that's when it happened. You alone actually have a pointer to that SCIT log in your vCon, and you have the responsibility to check it every day. So when Dan goes, I want to be forgotten, the next time you check, it's forgotten. And then you know that you need to take that off. And so that combination of taking the events and putting them on a ledger where everybody can see them, but not the personal data, just the events, right, allows you as the guy who's holding that data to be responsible in the holding of it, and which is the whole point behind the vCon.
And the J-Link cannot automate that process, so it takes it.
Yeah, it's a good question. So J-Link is another protocol which I happen to love. J-Link and Skit are in the same category for me as of frameworks, where they're both transparency services that allow you to record what happened. And J-Link has this nice little feature that allows you to express contracts and contracts between places. The big difference for me between J-Link and other things that do Skit is one around scope. So J-Link is much faster, much smaller, is much more manageable in a enterprise. But implementations of Skit like Apache Hyperledger Fabric, or Kona, or data trails that came up with Skit, this is a nation state solution. So if I'm the United States government, when I write something to a transparency ledger, it takes about a second for that thing to register, then maybe a minute for it to then propagate that registration. That 1 minute is the window of attack. If I'm trying to obfuscate or to change that ledger, my only opportunity is in that 1 minute window. And so I put a lot of hardware there to make it as fast as possible because I'm designing it for nation states. That's not the kind of attack which is generally seen by Frontier Airlines. And so for Frontier Airlines, J-Link might be a much better solution because it's much easier much faster, more simple, it's easier to scale up. But the difference is nation state security, which most places aren't. Yeah.
A question on the removing consent and actually, the notarial that actually goes in there. What happens if the use has been for a verbal contract that's been memorialized that, it's actually there's a fact record that can't be forgotten because there's liabilities and obligations.
Yeah.
How is that reconciled between
Fun thing. Yeah, so the consent attachment also contains proofs of consent.
Yeah.
And that proof of consent has many modes. So for instance, at Strawlid, where we've designed vCons, our proofs of consent came from our lead providers. So CarGurus gives us the lead. You clicked on that box. That's the written consent that we're looking for. We have that as our proof of consent. Other examples of proof of consent are I'm in the call itself and someone goes, hey, it's okay, you can record me, or no, I don't want to be recorded. That proof of consent points to a dialogue and a timestamp, right? And I don't know if the world is changing fast, obviously, but there's a new FCC regulation that says whenever a customer withdraws their consent under any communications channel, email, video, voice, messaging, you have to listen for all of it. So if someone goes, I don't want you to talk to me anymore in messaging, you have to pick that up and then replicate that over every other time you speak to that person for that particular thing. And that's a new law. So FCC. FCC. Yeah, the FCC does the CALEA and the TCPA, right? TCPA, is TCPA and FTC or FA?
It's regulated by FTC.
FCC, yeah, FCC.
Well, the Federal Trade Commission prosecutes for TBC violations.
Thank you. That was the confusion. Thank you for that. Huh?
What happens when multi-party?
Yes. So in multi-party conversation, so the vCon actually did well. We had imagined this 4 years ago, and it seemed to have worked out.
I mean, when someone redacts their consent, you only really have to apply that to what they said, right? The agent, if this is a call center the agent, presumably can't revoke their permission that was part of their contract. So, basically you could go through and redact everything that the person said, but keep the recording.
Yeah, and we keep track of which persons are in which dialogues, because it does, cross correlate. So you can do that. Kind of neat. Yep. Kind of neat. Okay, so those are the extensions. Did I miss any extension? There's a couple. As Dan said, we decided to break up the spec into two parts, and there are three, I would say, big documents that are in the working group right now. And the core document is what Dan is responsible for, and that's all the protocol work, the really low protocol work. The second document is called the overview, which is what I did, which is in general, and how does this all work like it works. That's what I did. And then I wrote, Diana, James, and I wrote the privacy primer. And one of the things, if you haven't read the privacy primer, I'd really love you to do that. So Diana James is an attorney at Marshallon, and we realized that there's lots of people who are going to be managing this data who've never done it before, right? Well, all kinds of people who are not going to start analyzing conversations, but without the prerequisite training and privacy concerns and minimization and ethics. So it is a document that is meant to catch you up. Here are the things that you need to be thinking about and worrying about. One of the really interesting things about consent and privacy is that we've got thousands of jurisdictions. Like even as I'm sitting here today, I'm sitting in a city, in a county, in a state, in a government, in a federal government. And that's 4, just where I'm sitting. And then there's different things for, as beyond the list, financials, brokerages, mortgages, governments, multiply that stuff. Okay, there's 1,000 combinations. And so one of the things we didn't try to do in the privacy primer is give you the answers, because there's too many answers to give. But fortunately, almost all the answers that you need to have to take care of a use case in a jurisdiction are covered by the fundamentals here. So it tells you what the issues are, what the fundamental issues are, so that when you go to implement these, you know which levers to pull.
That's the document you can send to legal, the company?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
cloud technology.
Correct.
And then there's one other internet draft that's in part of the working group as well, which I wrote with a bunch of input from Jonathan Rosenberg from 5.9, and that's the contact center extensions to the vCon core. And actually, it was interesting. Jonathan wrote up a kind of a requirements document of metadata and things like that related to contact center that was a great help early on. Some of that, the stuff, the metadata he identified, actually put in the core because it made sense, because it wasn't just contact center specific, and so there were things like a user UUID and concepts like that were in his kind of requirements document or use case scenario for contact center, and so. A good portion of that stuff actually ended up in the core as opposed to being in the extension, and then I put the stuff that was just contact center specific in the contact center extension. So.
Yeah, that's a great example. One of the nice things about the IETF is the IETFers. There's a lot of people who spend a lot of time building networks, and who love to help, and so it's been really a pleasure to have like Jonathan Rosenberg show up to help. I mean, it's sort of like, I don't know, getting together a pickup game of basketball and Shaq shows up. It's kind of hard to lose.
You get to RFC, you need 2 implementations, right?
Say it again?
To get to RFC, you need 2 implementations.
Yes.
I don't know that that's. I mean,
Well,
there are more than 2.
There's well more
we don't
now.
have to prove that, but I don't know that if that's. I mean, that used to be more conceptual than actually. I think.
Well, it was a good point, right? You can't
No,
interoperate.
I don't know if
just
anyone
like interoperate
enforces
with-
that, but
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly helps, right? It helps to justify it, and that's one of the things that I've been doing at like the hackathons. The IETF has a hackathon the weekend before every meeting, and so every IETF that we've gone to, with the since we started with the vCon stuff, I've done something with vCon, and what I've done each time is tried to implement one of the features or one or more of the features or capabilities in the draft, and so that has been hugely helpful, and because almost every time I do that, I identify some issue, right? All right, here's a problem, or here's a hole, or we need to add this additional metadata because of this scenario, and just implementing everything has really identified and helped us to really solidify the spec.
Yeah. So can I tell you about the vCon hack I did this time? I didn't submit it because they had 50 hacks in China, and they each got 2 minutes. I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm not.
so the hackathon is huge. I mean,
Not doing that.
there's like 300-400 people that go to this thing, and so there are groups of 1 to 10 people in it. So there's lots of stuff going on, and everybody gets a chance to talk about their stuff. But there's so many.
There's a
and
lot.
They only have like a 2-hour time slot. You get 2 minutes to describe your.
And just,
your
yeah,
hack.
but-
It's really
Really hard.
really tough.
So what I did was I took all the IETF sessions from 100. So we just got out of 125. So the last 15 IETF sessions, and each session has a couple hundred, about a couple hundred
Work group meetings. Yeah,
work group meetings.
that are recorded.
You have that
video and audio.
video and chat.
And there's a live transcript as well,
Right.
which is
Not great.
not very accurate.
Not very good. And so what I did was I turned all 2,246 sessions of the IETF, and I asked exactly how did the internet get designed? What are the principles of the design of the internet as revealed by the conversations that people have? And so, and I'll forward it out to you. And so it identified 12 different principles of internet design, like the end-to-end principle and designing for reliability and the like. And what it did was it identified those 12, and for each of the 12, it gives you like a nice little overview of what it is, and then it backs up the design principles with actual dialogue from IETF meetings. So we have one of my team at vCon. I have a junior engineer who is really junior but smart and doesn't know a lot about IETF internet designs, and so I thought this was a great opportunity to say, this is how you design the internet, and here are the 11 things you have to do right. and as revealed by the conversations themselves. It's really interesting. And so just like Dan and I do the same thing. So when I do my hackathons, I'm an apps guy, right? I write apps that use vCons because I'm looking for the holes.
Yeah.
Looking for the holes. So anyways, I'll forward that out to you. It's a good little network, network primer for you. All right.
That just brought up a whole new idea. I told you so.
Well, that's Jeff's idea, right? Jeff's all about, I want vCon so I can tell my sister that I was right. It seems like a niche case, but a lot of us have sisters. So maybe it's not so nichey, I don't know. And I just one more thing I got before. And by the way, thank you, Dan. And it's really nice just to have you guys understand the process that we go through, because you hear about it, but you don't know what it actually is like, right? So Ben and I we went to Shenzhen together this time because Ben is looking at IETF submissions for JLink/MyTerms stuff, and it was really interesting to see that again, a newcomer, getting trained on it. And so, what did you think, Ben? What was your as that was your first IETF? Give us like a paragraph of what you thought. I'd be interested.
It's a standards body.
It's a standards body.
Just like other standard bodies I've been through.
Yeah.
But it's, I think the big differentiation between, to me anyway, IETF versus some of the others that I've worked with, IEEE, Linux Foundation, is the engineering focus. So standards and IETF are what companies actually use versus just this happens to be a thing that exists. So
Yeah.
that's the impression I get from being there. And I think that just purely comes from the fact that that's more engineering focused.
Well, thank you. My hackathon revealed that one of the core principles of the IETF, and is spoken 527 times in the past 15 sessions, is rough consensus and running code. We run rough consensus and running code, and that's our measurement. If it ain't running, and people don't have consensus, it's not an IETF.
Can't get into IETF unless people are use your stuff.
Correct.
When
Correct.
people ask you actively, where's the fit? Right?
when you're beginning.
Yeah. Mhm. Well, we bootstrapped this. I was thinking about all the, all the different implementations that we had to get going, and yeah, it's been great. Any questions that you guys have before we run out of time here?
I'm just curious, if you go back 20 years, almost, is the standards process today fundamentally any different? It sounds like there's more voices involved.
Well, I'll yeah,
more constituents.
there is a real difference. So Dan and I met during SIP, right? So Dan was the architect for the SIP, for the first SIP phone.
Yeah.
Yep. And I
wrote the RFC for transfer and refer, and so when you're doing a SIP transfer, I was the co-author of that.
Yeah, and I was heading CTO. And the difference is, back in the day, there was so much money in VC, so much.
Yeah, in the 90s there was.
It was incredible. And unfortunately, it cast a pall on the IETF from what I could see, because of the trust issue. And because people didn't trust. When you're designing, there's lots of little things about the IETF that point to a much larger issue, which is we're designing this internet for everybody. Your mother is going to use what I do, right? And that's a really high level of responsibility, right? This is a big deal. And so, and I'll leave you with this story. So at vCon, one of our advisors is Jeremy Miller, whom I love to death. He's a wonderful man. And he wrote XMPP and was founder of Jabber with Perry. And I was at the hackathon with two of his friends who had written Blue Sky. He also wrote the ACT protocol, which runs Blue Sky. And so I'm sitting at the table, and the area directors are coming by and talking to him, because we want to figure out if we want to support the AT protocol and the IETF. They're trying to figure this out. And so they're talking, and one AD who'll go unnamed came over and he goes, "I love this. I love your commitment to privacy, and this is really great stuff." And Jeremy's God. People love Jeremy. But didn't he write the AT protocol with some other guy? Well, who was that guy? Jack Dorsey? And they go, "Yeah, it was Jack Dorsey." And he looks him in the eyes and goes, "So I'm not sure that's a good thing, because I have no idea what his motivations are. I don't know who he is. I don't know why he's doing it. I don't know why he would do it." And that's worrisome. I think one of the reasons why Dan and I were able to pull this off is because we grew up in the IETF. We've got such long histories. They know who we are. We're inspected material at this point. And it really speaks just to the sensitivity of the stuff that we do. It's a big world.
What was kind of fascinating, if you look back at XMPP was a messaging standard that was antithetical, that it didn't evolve from simple.
Right, it was a diversion from simple.
In the room, if you will,
Right.
of this new real-time true standard evolving.
Yeah, just like with SIP and MGCP and Megacode and H323, right? There was the protocol battles, right? Right, yeah.
And, XMPP went on to become WhatsApp and Google Voice and so forth. But those were very different lanes, if you will, than the telecom.
Yeah.
On what changed in 20 years, Ben just went recently and he attended the dispatch meeting. And a dispatch meeting is where, kind of new ideas come to see if, if they can maybe be adopted someplace in the IETF. When you're looking for a home, an area, or a work group, or deciding whether you have to create a new one. In the 90s, that was a gong show, right? People would get up on the stage and they would get heckled off the stage. Because there were so many proposals in the 90s boom. And that's where I think the IETF is matured in that there are a lot more, there's a lot more policing of being, you know, PC and not abusive or whatever. Where that wasn't the case 20 years ago.
Yeah, there was this, the most dangerous place in technology is the microphone at an IETF meeting.
In the early meetings of the Voice over IP, Microsoft were trying to bully everybody. They would
Yeah,
say, you don't do this?
Yeah.
My way, it's
Yeah.
my way or not?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And they lost.
Yeah.
they did.
Yep.
Yeah, and I well, you know, depends on your metric. Okay, well, so thank you all for coming here right now, but in general, I'm like, thanks for caring about vCons. I think it's a good thing and it's a great opportunity, so I appreciate your interest. Thank you. Dan?
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, I'll remask.
I need to run up to.